Have you ever had that feeling, where your brain just feels completely stuck? You've got a whole list of things to do. You even want to do them, but for some reason you just can't. It's so frustrating, right? And it's a struggle that leads a lot of people to ask themselves, wait, do I have ADHD? Well, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating case that explores that exact question. And it shows why sometimes the most obvious answer isn't the right one at all.
So, let me tell you about the person at the center of this story. She's a college grad, has a demanding government job, and she's even in grad school. From the outside looking in, you'd think she has it all together. But on the inside, she felt completely paralyzed, just overwhelmed to the point where she couldn't do anything. And this one quote, "I'm like paralyzed with fear that I can't even start," well, that really says it all.
For her, every single day was the same cycle. She'd make a to-do list, she'd plan out her day, but then crickets. Nothing would get done. And the procrastination just kept building and building until the deadlines were practically screaming at her, which of course just made that frozen feeling even worse. She was so frustrated, and trying to find an answer, she landed on one conclusion. She had to have undiagnosed ADHD.
And honestly, when you look at her symptoms, you can totally see why she thought that. Come on. She said she was losing things daily. She couldn't focus on anything, not even a podcast or a book she was actually interested in. She had to ask her boss to write down instructions because she just couldn't hold on to them if they were spoken. Restless, fidgety, interrupting people. It is a textbook ADHD checklist.
But here's the thing, a good diagnosis, it's so much more than just a checklist. The symptoms, they're just the clues you see on the surface. To really solve the mystery of what was going on, the experts had to start digging. They had to get past the what and start asking the really important question, why?
And that's when the real process began. This isn't just a few questions and then you walk out with a prescription. A full neuropsychological assessment is kind of like forensic accounting, but for your mind. It combines these super in-depth interviews about your entire life with objective computerized tests that actually measure things like attention and memory. It's all designed to separate what a person feels is happening from how their brain is objectively performing.
Okay, so this is where the detective work really kicks into high gear. The assessment started to uncover these key pieces of evidence, clues, really, that began to paint a way more complex picture than anyone expected. And the very first clue came from the hard data.
So the cognitive tests came back, and right away there was a major conflict. First off, her sustained attention was objectively impaired. She wasn't imagining it, her brain was genuinely struggling to focus. But then look at the other piece of data. Her scores for anxiety were through the roof, significantly elevated. So this was our first big clue. We've got two really powerful things going on here. And the real question becomes, which one is driving the bus?
The second clue is fascinating. It came from a huge difference in perspective. When the client rated her own ADHD-like symptoms, she described them as severe, life-altering. But when a close family member, someone who knows her really well, filled out the exact same form, they described her symptoms as mild, maybe even average. Now, this doesn't mean she was wrong or exaggerating. It means her internal experience of distress was way, way greater than what anyone could see on the outside. Her suffering was absolutely real. It was just happening on the inside.
And that leads us to the third and honestly, the most decisive clue of all. This one came straight from the client herself during her interview. The question was simple, but powerful. If we've got these two competing issues, attention and anxiety, what happens if we just isolate one of them? What happens if we treat the anxiety directly?
And this was the light bulb moment. The client mentioned she had an as-needed anti-anxiety medication, and when she took it, the paralysis, gone. Her ability to focus came right back. All that executive dysfunction just vanished. Her exact words were, "Everything is great." An anxiety medication was completely fixing what looked for all the world like an attention problem. This was the key that unlocked the whole mystery.
So with all these clues assembled, the hard data, the conflicting perspectives, and the game-changing effect of that medication, the diagnostic picture finally snapped into focus. And the problem was not what she or anyone else thought it was.
The assessment concluded her symptoms were not being caused by ADHD. Nope. Instead, the primary drivers were generalized anxiety disorder and a trauma and stressor-related disorder, which came from some really difficult life experiences she had talked about. See, her brain wasn't wired for inattention. It was being hijacked by anxiety.
And this just perfectly illustrates the whole concept of symptom overlap. Think of your brain's processing power like the battery on your phone. Chronic anxiety, that's like having 10 power-hungry apps running in the background 24/7. It just drains your cognitive resources. And what's the result? Well, you can't focus, you feel restless, you can't start anything because of paralysis by analysis, and you forget things. It looks, feels, and acts exactly like ADHD, but the root cause is totally different.
And this is the best part of the story, really. The power of getting the right diagnosis is that it gives you a clear path forward. Instead of going down a road of treating ADHD, which would not have worked, she now had a brand new and much more accurate map to follow.
And that map came with 3 very clear steps. First, she needed to work with her psychiatrist to find a daily medication that could give her the same relief that her as-needed one did. Second, start therapy to safely process the underlying trauma that was fueling all that anxiety. And third, build practical, real-world strategies to manage the symptoms, not as a fix for ADHD, but as tools to cope with the cognitive burnout from anxiety.
You know, this case just goes to show you that a diagnosis shouldn't be some restrictive label you're stuck with. It should be an empowering tool. It's the difference between being lost in the woods and finally being handed a compass. For this client, just understanding that anxiety was the real enemy meant she could finally start heading toward the right solutions.
And that kind of brings us to the big takeaway here. It is so easy to latch onto a diagnosis that seems to fit what we're feeling on the surface, but this story challenges all of us to think a little deeper. If you ever feel that same sense of being paralyzed, of being stuck, maybe the first question isn't, do I have this specific condition? Maybe the real question is, what is truly causing me to feel this way? The answer might be a little more complex, for sure, but finding it is the first step on a path that actually leads you forward.